الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This lecture, inshallah, will be devoted to talk about the miraculous nature of the Quran, Ijaz of Quran. And this is a general view that includes many aspects of Ijaz of Quran. Actually, the Quran itself is a miracle by any means. The Quran is miraculous in all aspects of revelation. The Quran will still be the miracle, permanent miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to last in mankind to prove the oneness of Allah and to prove that this speech, the speech of Allah, has come from Him, not a man-made speech. Actually, when we talk about Ijaz of Quran, we have first of all to define what is Ijaz. When we talk about Ijaz, we first define it linguistically. Ijaz means to render something incapable of. Render something or somebody incapable of doing something. So Ijaz means to be incapable of. They define mu'jizat. It is defined as acts performed by prophets of a miraculous nature that humans are incapable to imitate. This is something which is done by prophets and mankind will not be able to imitate. إعجاز هو في حد ذاته حاجة بيعملها بس يعملها مين؟ It should be the prophets. So the mu'jizat is acts that are done by the prophets, and mankind is not capable to imitate it. So in this definition, actually you find that the mu'jiza itself, that it should be commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or by His leave. And it is something that is supernatural. It is not a common thing that anybody can do. And it is not anybody can do that, but only the Prophet. So it comes to be on the hand of a Prophet, and it is to occur at the hand of a Prophet, and the act must match the claim of that Prophet. Actually, I wanted to give you the definition of a mu'jiza in Arabic in order to match this with that of English. mu'jiza in Arabic هي أمر خارق للعادة يجريه الله تبارك وتعالى على يد مدعي النبوة يعني لسه هنا مش عارفين هو نبي ولا لا، فالله سبحانه وتعالى بيجريه على يد مدعي النبوة ليقول هذا نبي فصدقوه، لأنه إذا كان الأمر إعجاز البشر يبقى ده النبي ده ما جابش هذا الكلام أو ما جابش هذه الرسالة أو ما جابش هذا الدين من عندياته. فعشان كده كأن ربنا سبحانه وتعالى بيقول إيه؟ هذا أمر من عندي. والدليل على ذلك أن هذا الذي يقول لكم أني نبي أني أجري على يديه شيئا خارقا للعادة. هذا الشيء الخارق للعادة لا يستطيعه أي أحد، هو جاي من ربنا سبحانه وتعالى، بما معناه هذا صادق فصدقوه، هذا صادق بهذه المعجزة فصدقوه. يبقى أمر يجريه الله أو أمر خارق للعادة يجريه الله تبارك وتعالى على مدعي النبوة ليقول كأني هذا صادق فصدقوه. Also the act itself must not refute the prophet's claim. For example, when the prophet says, I will, if a people claims, if a prophet claims that a certain stone will speak, and the stone speaks and says that this person is alive. So this is not actually a mu'jiza. It is not mu'jiza. And that one is not a prophet. يبقى لازم ألا يناقض الحدث دعوى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. ألا يناقض الحدث دعوى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Actually, the Quran has been distinguished to be a mu'jiza or a miracle in itself. The Quran has been a miracle in itself. The preceding scriptures, Torah and the Gospel, actually they were not miracles in themselves, but the Quran is a legislation, is a book, and is a miracle in itself. Here we have to differentiate also between what is meant by karama and what is meant by sihr, because when it connects to something which is supernatural, this supernatural thing can happen with some ordinary man, not a prophet, but actually is not to support his claim. The man or a good man can have a karama, and this karama is something that is supernatural, but it is not happening to support this man. مش محتاجين ان احنا نؤيده، دوت مش نبي، لكن يحدث ايضا لاتباع الانبياء انه زي ما المعجزات تحصل للانبياء في حاجه اسمها كرامه، وان كانت الكرامه تتضمن في المعجزه. الكرامه زي كرامه الصحابه، يعني في كرامات كثيره للصحابه. الكرامه الحقيقه it is included in the معجزه, or it is doing something in the same direction of a miracle, doing something in the same direction. Look for example, many of the karamat happened in the era of the companions. For example, two of the companions left the Prophet to go home, and with them moved with them a light, and this light was actually guiding them. And when they separated, this light split into two for each one. So this is karama. And of course, there are many karamat of reciting the Quran itself. One Sahabi was reciting the Quran in a night, and he saw a light descending, and when the second day, the day after, he told the Prophet said, "This is a sakina لقراءة القرآن." So this is something supernatural, and it can be included in the karamat, in the miracles. Of course, when this thing, not to be a karama, when this thing is evil thing, so we say that is sihr, and actually sihr is done in cooperation with the jinn. Sihr is done in cooperation with the jinn, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the sihr, سحر هذا ولا يفلح الساحرون فلما ألقوا قال موسى ما جئتم به السحر إن الله سيبطله إن الله لا يصلح عمل المفسدين. And he said, وألق ما في يمينك تلقف ما صنعوا إنما صنعوا كيد ساحر ولا يفلح الساحر حيث أتى. Right. The proof of معجزات actually started from the prophets before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that is to prove that there are mu'jizat or miracles with other prophets. No prophet whosoever came except when he had some miracles. لازم أي نوع من المعجزات. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Jesus Christ, ورسولا إلى بني إسرائيل أني قد جئتكم بآية من ربكم أني أخلق لكم من الطين كهيئة الطير فأنفخ فيه فيكون طيرا بإذن الله وأبرئ الأكمه والأبرص وأحيي الموتى بإذن الله وأنبئكم بما تأكلون وما تدخرون في بيوتكم إن في ذلك لآية لكم إن كنتم مؤمنين. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, سأل بني إسرائيل كم آتيناهم من آية بينة. And the word ayah here means a miracle, something supernatural. Not only that, but the disbelievers of Mecca knew that no prophet came except with some sort of miracles. So they asked the prophet to give miracles like the other prophets. And they said, وقالوا لن نؤمن لك حتى تفجر لنا من الأرض ينبوعا أو تكون لك جنة من نخيل وعنب فتفجر الأنهار خلالها تفجيرا أو تسقط السماء كما زعمت علينا كسفا أو تأتي بالله والملائكة قبيلا أو يكون لك بيت من زخرف أو ترقى في السماء ولن نؤمن لرقيك حتى تنزل علينا كتابا نقرأه قل سبحان ربي هل كنت إلا بشرا رسولا. Actually, the miracle is not taking place with the wishes or desires of mankind. It is only left to Allah. It is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a miracle can take place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ أَنَّنَا نَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةَ وَكَلَّمَهُمُ الْمَوْتَى وَحَشَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ قُبُلًا مَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُم يَجْهَلُونَ. So all these are actually evidences or proofs that miracles adhere to the messages of the prophets in all times. Even this, however, was not sufficient for the disbelieving Meccans. They claimed that the prophet was a liar who forged the Quran or a magician. They called him a liar or a magician. So they said, this Quran with its miraculous aspect, we can say something, we can bring forth something like it, but actually they didn't. وإذا تتلى عليهم آياتنا قالوا قد سمعنا لو نشاء لقلنا مثل هذا إن هذا إلا أساطير الأولين. Right. All of this is actually something about the nature of the miracle itself. Now, having the Quran as a miracle is something very unique. It is something different. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made i'jaz or the immutability of the Quran, made it in some new way. The Quran itself is a speech and it is composed of the same letters of the Arabic language that the Arabs of Mecca and Arabia in general spoke. So he gave them the same letters, the same language, but he challenged them to bring forth something like it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course there are 5 verses in the Quran denoting to this challenge. And actually the challenge is still on until the day of judgment. Nobody, no nation, even if mankind and the jinn supported each other, they will not bring forth something like the Quran. 5 verses. وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين. This is something relating to only one surah. The second, أم يقولون افتراه قل فأتوا بسورة مثله وادعوا من استطعتم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. The same thing. أم يقولون افتراه قل فأتوا بعشر سور مثله مفتريات وادعوا من استطعتم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. And for the Quran as a whole, قل إن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. And he says أم يقولون تقوله بل لا يؤمنون فليأتوا بحديث مثله إن كانوا صادقين. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that challenge, and the challenge is still on until the day of judgment. For those verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave as a challenge, there are 5 verses for challenge. Are they ordered in a certain way? In a certain way, I mean, started with the whole Quran and then 10 surahs and then only 1 surah, or started with 1 surah and then 10 surahs and then the whole Quran. This is a difference between the ulama. They differed about that into 5 opinions. The initial challenge was to produce something similar to the whole Quran. The أول حاجة جت. This was then reduced to 10 surahs, then to finally to 1 surah. يعني ابتدى من ايه؟ من كل القرآن 10 سور ثم surah. The second opinion to produce only 1 surah. This was then increased to 10 surahs, then to the whole Quran. Finally, in the last of these verses revealed, Allah reduced the challenge back to 1 surah. ربنا سبحانه وتعالى راح نقلل بقى تاني ل 1 surah. الثالث was to produce the whole Quran, the challenge. And that was reduced to 10 surahs, and then the initial challenge was to produce the whole Quran. When they were unable to do this, the challenge was reduced to 10 surahs that would imitate the Quran in prose and semantics, but not in content. Lastly, the challenge was reduced to 1 surah that matched the Quran in prose and content. الاثنين مع بعض. The fourth opinion, there is no graduality in these challenges. No graduality. It talks about the Quran and its miraculous aspect in everything. In 1 verse, in a surah, in 10 surahs, in the whole Quran, but it is not specifying, and the challenge is not going in a certain way. Actually, the most acceptable opinion is number 3. That is to reduce the whole Quran. Then when they were unable to, that was reduced to 10 surahs, and when they were unable to produce 10 surahs that would imitate the Quran in prose and semantics, but not in content. Lastly, the challenge was reduced to 1 surah that matched the Quran in prose and content.
يعني من تحت لفوق.
بالبروز and content. لا، داخل فيها ايه؟ داخل فيها بقى الستراكشر وداخل فيها المعنى. لان انا ممكن اقول اعجاز القرآن فقط في الايه؟ في الستراكشر بتاع الايات. In the structure and in the words and terms of the Quran. There is a miraculous aspect on that. But also, and it goes in the same way, we say that the contents of the Quran, the meanings that are given, they give meaning, they give ahkam, they give some conceptions to the Arabs. This is also a miraculous side. Of these four opinions, the third one, which is very similar to the first opinion, seems to have the strongest proof. Actually, anyway, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anticipated that no one, mankind and the jinn will never be able to produce something like the Quran. And he said, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَنْ تَفْعَلُوا فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ وَأُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. And actually, we are sure that the challenge itself is still on. Still on يعني إيه؟ يعني لغاية يوم القيامة. لو حد يحب يعمل جدع ويجيب حاجة زي القرآن يورينا شطارته، لأنه لسه التحدي قائم إلى يوم القيامة. Right. Quran as the miracle of the Prophet. Actually, this is one aspect of the miraculous aspects of the Quran. The Quran is something that is confirming the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran is the miracle of the Prophet. He was given this miracle as the ultimate proof of his prophethood. So, the proof from the Quran itself, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ آيَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِ قُلْ إِنَّمَا الْآيَاتُ عِندَ اللَّهِ وَإِنَّمَا أَنَا نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. شوف بقى هيقول إيه بقى على إنه إيه؟ هم كانوا يطلبوا آيات حسية. يعني آيات المقصود بها آيات حسية. وقالوا لولا أنزل عليه آيات من ربه. معجزات حسية. ربنا سبحانه وتعالى هيحولهم لإيه؟ للمعجزة المعنوية الفاصلة. أولم يكفيهم أن أنزلنا عليك الكتاب يتلى عليهم إن في ذلك لرحمة وذكرى لقوم يؤمنون. So this is actually a proof that the Quran itself, or the proof of the miraculous aspect of the Quran itself from the Quran. When the disbelievers asked for miracles from the Prophet, Allah revealed that the Quran itself is sufficient as a miracle. واحنا قلنا انه ايه؟ انه ربنا سبحانه وتعالى مش زي الانبياء السابقين. ربنا سبحانه وتعالى كان بيدي قبل كده المعجزات كطلب اتباع الانبياء، لكن للاسف الشديد ما كانوش بيؤمنوا، كفروا واستكبروا. فعشان كده ربنا سبحانه وتعالى قال لا، مش هنديهم المعجزات زي ما هم عايزين، لكن هنديهم معجزه اخرى، ليست معجزه حسيه، وانما هي معجزه معنويه ولغويه، معجزه تشريعيه، معجزه تحوي كل انواع المعجزات، ونشوف هيجيبوا زيها لغايه يوم القيامه. دليل ايضا من السنه، the Prophet peace be upon him said about the i'jaz of the Quran. The Prophet said in some hadith, ما من نبي من الأنبياء إلا أعطي ما مثله آمن عليه البشر وإنما كان الذي أوتيته وحيا أوحاه الله إلي فأرجو أن أكون أكثرهم تابعا يوم القيامة. يعني he is explaining that the miracles before the Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him were that kind of miracles that is explicit, sensible, something sensible. But what he has been given is a miracle that will last until the day of judgment, according to the number of people that are following the Prophet Muhammad. شوف الحديث بيقول ايه؟ ما من الانبياء نبي الا اعطي ما مثله امن عليه البشر وانما كان الذي اوتيته وحيا اوحاه الله الي فارجو ان اكون اكثرهم تابعا يوم القيامة. This is actually the proof from the Sunnah. It doesn't mean that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had no other miracles or sensible miracles. No, he had many miracles. But to have something against him, against the people, that is to keep a miracle which is lasting, Al-Quran. For example, splitting of the moon in half, the increase of the inadequate amount of food to a very large quantity. The speaking of stones, animals and trees to him, and the sprouting of water from his hands when the companions were short of it. However, none of these miracles were permanent. عشان كده لما نقول ايه؟ لما نقول انه اللي ما توصلوش هذه المعجزات، هو لازم اللي يوصل القرآن لازم يؤمن به لانه معجز ومستمر الى يوم القيامة. لكن اللي ما توصلوش هذه المعجزات او وصلت له بطريقة هو ما قبلهاش عقلا فهو مش مطالب بهذا. عندما كانت هذه المعجزات لهؤلاء الذين عاشوا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وشاهدوها، هي برهان لهؤلاء الذين شاهدوا هذه المعجزات. Actually, the Quran is a miracle that it removes the constraints of time and place upon the miracle. The Quran is a permanent miracle for all generations after the Prophet. This is it. يعني القوة والعظمة في هذه المعجزة إنها تتخطى وبتتخطى حواجز الزمان والمكان. جاءت منذ 14 قرنا نقرأه الآن ونفهمه وفيه إعجازه، ويقرأه الذين بعدنا والذين قبلنا ويفهموه وهو فيه إعجازه أيضا. Types of إعجاز. Types of إعجاز. الإعجاز بتاع القرآن ممكن يكون في إيه وفي إيه وفي إيه. هي دي نقطة مهمة الحقيقة جدا. The beauty of the Quran is that it is not just miraculous in one facet, but rather from all aspects and the angles that one can look at. For example, Az-Zarkashi, and he is a great scholar in religion. Az-Zarkashi made details about the I'jaz al-Quran. Az-Zarkashi said, and I would rather read that to comment on it, the eloquence of the Quran above that of any human speech. You know that the Arabs were the most eloquent people at the time of the Prophet, and they were given the Arabic language, which was the most eloquent language whatsoever. So its eloquency is actually the first one. The unique arrangement and organization of its verses and surahs. Nobody will wander in the Quran except he will discover that the structure, this is a unique structure of the Quran. Unique structure to give some ideas, to give some meanings. And the order of the ayat, the verses itself, is in itself a miracle. The incapability to reduce anything similar to it, and this is, of course, was the challenge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the disbelievers in the time of the Prophet. The stories and the accounts of the nations and the prophets of old. Of course, we will come to that, to each one of that in details, but we are going to only to give them quickly. The stories and the accounts of the nations and the prophets of old, the predictions which occurred in the Quran.